Hi folks, my name is Glennie LeBaron and I am the 2021 Summer Stewardship and Outreach Assistant. Today I'm going to take us through how to read a survey map. Survey maps are super duper helpful when you are monitoring a property. When you pick up a monitoring packet, you will get a large copy of a survey and a small copy. Surveys are they are a type of map that shows the property boundaries and a couple of the key features within the property. Whether you have a fee-owned property or an easement property that you are monitoring, you will be getting a survey map. This is an example from a fee-owned property over in Wilmot. And today we're just going to go over the key components of these maps, a couple helpful reminders. Then we will interpret some of the items from the key and look for them in the map. And then we will go through a little example of how we would use a survey to plan and then execute a route for a monitor visit. So when we first open the map, what we'll see, let me get this the right size, is we'll see an outline of the property. It could be, you may have a couple different maps that all go together and connect. So this is definitely a good first step, is to try and orient yourself. You can orient yourself using a couple different pieces. First, this north arrow is going to be really helpful. Pretty self-explanatory. It shows north on the map. So that should help orient you. Also, this inset map will be really useful in showing you where exactly the property is in relation to other roads and different areas in the town. It might be a helpful tool if you are trying to navigate to the property or deciding how best to access the property. And finally, down here, we have the scale bar. So this shows how distances on the map are going to relate to distances once you're actually on the property. This is a useful tool if you are trying to guess how long it might take you to conduct a site visit. And it's just one component of many other pieces that will determine how long it's going to take you to make it around a property. Let's see. Now, a couple different helpful reminders as you start looking at your map is that you may notice an address in the middle of the map. This is not the address of your property, and this is not going to be a useful tool to direct you to the property itself. You should have information about driving instructions that will likely also tell you what piece of the property you will be starting on. So again, just to recap, this address here is not, and there will be one pretty much on every map, is not going to be a helpful tool to get you where you're trying to go. In addition to that, we also want to look at the year that the map was made. So if we look down here, we can see that the map was made on October 15th, 2001. That date is really important, is really helpful, because if this map was perhaps from the 80s, different features that might have been obvious or found in the 80s may be different or hard to find now. A big example of that is woods roads and tree lines and field boundaries. Those things do tend to shift over time. So recognize that if your survey is older, it may not be as useful when you're looking at those types of things. Okay, now we can, another piece to mention is that as you look at these boundary lines, it's important to also remember that this is not a topographic map, and it may not show everywhere there is water. So an example of that is that this boundary may have very steep rolling hills, or it may have different ledge features, or you may even encounter a wetland or a brook over in this corner. So that's something to keep in mind as you plan your route, that just because it is a half mile or a quarter mile, it may be very challenging to navigate. Perfect. All righty. Now, let's go over a couple different pieces from the key. So this is the key up here. It's a really useful way to make sure that you are reading your map correctly, and it will describe the different symbols that you might encounter in the map. So we'll go through that really quick. First, we'll look at stone walls. Stone walls are really useful because they have often been historic boundary markers. So a lot of our boundaries actually do follow a stone wall almost exactly. So an example of that is over here on the Cassie Brook map. You can see these little ovals. That's an indicator that there is a stone wall and that the boundary itself is the stone wall. This is really useful because stone walls tend to be quite easy to follow depending on the season of your visit. Second, we have iron pipes. So we'll see that there are a couple different indicators of corners on the map. So things like pipes, rods, drill holes, all three of those fall into the subset of corner markers. So an example of an iron pipe would be, let's see if there's one on this map. This over here, this corner, see how that's an open circle, there's nothing filling it? That's going to be an iron pipe. And just to contextualize that, an iron pipe will look something like this picture over here. So it will be a pretty wide metal tube sticking out. It may have, some of our boundary markers have a cap like this yellow one that will be a bright color such as yellow or red. Those caps can often be stuck on it. And then you'll also look for colored blazes in the trees to tell you where you're going. The other type of corner that you might see is an iron rod. So an iron rod is going to look more like this piece of metal or this piece here. So it's a lot thinner, a little bit smaller. It can still be tall and sticking out of the ground though. So that's something else to look for. One corner marker that's quite difficult to find is a drill hole. So that's a solid black marker, and those are often found in the corners of stone walls or in large rocks. So the whole idea is that somebody drilled a hole into a rock that is going to be very hard or almost impossible to move, and that is the corner marker. However, these can be really hard to find, as if you go in the wintertime, they'll be covered with snow. They can also very quickly get covered by leaves and other debris. An example of a drill hole is over here in this back corner. This solid, small black dot is a drill hole. So those are a couple pieces of our key, a couple things. This map specifically has a couple unique features. We do have a power line going through one side of Cassie Brook. And so that's what these little ovals with loop-de-loops on them are. These are the exact locations of the telephone poles. I don't think the resolution is high enough, but sometimes it will tell you, I think that this number would tell you the number of the telephone pole. So if you get turned around and you find a telephone pole, you can actually even find the number on it. And so we would call this a power line easement. You'll see here that, and specifically marked that there is supposed to be a power line here and that it's clear. And you'll see this different dashed line as a way to differentiate it from other boundary lines you might see on the map. Great, and then some maps will have woods roads marked on them. These are old logging roads or either class 6 roads that may cut through the property. These can be really helpful as you plan your route because it's a lot easier to walk on old logging roads than it is to bushwhack through forests. So this is an example here on this side. It just says Woodland Lane, and you can see that it will trace through the property. Now that you know all the different parts of the map, we can talk a little bit about how you might use this map to first plan your route and then execute your route once you are visiting a property. So the first step is to figure out how to drive there and where you're going to start. So this map shows you that Elkins Road is up here in the north, and you might read, if you get a property description, that there is access from a shared driveway off Elkins Road. That's this driveway here. So you can make a plan and say, I'm going to drive down this driveway and I'm going to park here under the power line at the parking spot. That's a great first step because it tells you where on the property you're going to start, and from there you can plan your route. Now this is a larger property, so you might want to do it in 2 days. So you can take a look and say, I'm going to start here at the parking lot and I'm going to just do this lower part of the property today, and I'll come back tomorrow and I will do this upper part. So you can this is a good time to start thinking about those types of options and thinking about how you might utilize other features such as this open power line to quickly cut across the property. So even though our boundaries are relatively well marked, they will either be a stone wall, or you should be able to follow painted trees or flagging tape, which will be a bright color of ribbon in the trees. It's also always a really good skill to be able to use a compass to navigate the boundary lines. So there's a whole handout that explains how to use a compass, and we connect that with the map by looking at the bearings on the map. So I can show you an example here. So let's say, for example, you started here in the parking lot, you followed this line here, you found your markers, you found an iron rod here, you came up, you found this iron rod, you found this one, and then you've discovered that it was kind of hard to follow the line, so you wanted to use your compass to make sure that you were going to end up at this point correctly. Now, that's where the compass bearing and distance comes in. So there will be two sets of numbers, one of which includes letters. The number that includes letters is going to be your bearing. So that's the direction you're going to want to be facing. And then this lower number is going to be a distance. So this one, for example, is 1,500 feet. And then it shows you that it's south 38 east. These two sets of numbers are really helpful because you can use them to navigate. So what you would do is you need to start at a known point. So you would start over here at this iron rod, and then you're going to use the dial on your compass, which I'll show you in a second, to put in this number, and then you will follow this line for about 1,500 feet. Hopefully your line will have some type of marker at the end. This is one of those cases that does not have a marker, so it might be challenging to know where you're going to end up. And that's another thing you might want to think about is what is the easiest way to cross this line? Should I start from this side and go up, or should I start up here and go down? So that's a sort of judgment call you might have to make on your map. So let's go look at some pictures of compasses and think about how we might bring those pieces together. So first we would start off with our compass, which is our base plate compass, and keep it at a flat angle. If you haven't looked at the handout yet, something to know is that this round part actually rotates. So what you'll do, your first step holding it flat, is you will rotate it to the appropriate bearing. So this one I think was 48. So you can see that this dial has been changed. So it's facing at just about 48 degrees. Again, this is with the mirror facing you. So you could look at yourself in the mirror, you rotate it so that 48 is in line with this top tick. And now you'll see that you have a red needle. That red needle is what's actually moving in the compass. And then you'll notice that you have just rotated this stationary red arrow with a hole in it. That stationary red arrow is where you're going to line your needle up with. So sometimes people will say, put red in the shed. That's what they mean. And how you do that is you no longer touch the dial. You're going to want to leave the dial pointed at this number. You rotate your body. So you'll rotate yourself until that needle is safely situated inside the shed. So you'll have had to do a little bit of a rotation. And then hopefully you'll still be standing near your starting point. So hopefully you have some type of corner that you're standing at. You'll be facing a direction. And that's when you can fold the mirror up, hold it to your face, make sure you're staying at the right line. You'll look through a little hole in the top and you'll be able to find a point that you can navigate to. There's a whole handout and a video about how to do this. This was just a really super quick version. Something else that I want to note, when you're looking at bearings in a map, you'll see this very small arrow. So that is the direction that bearing was taken. So that would mean that this person started here and went this way. Now, let's say you're starting down below at this lower corner. If you want to go, now you want to go more of a northwest direction instead of southeast, there are a couple different options to change this bearing to make it able to go northeast. So what I like to do is I'll still put in south 38 into my compass. And then instead of putting red in the shed, what I will do is I will put the opposite needle in the shed. So I will put, so in this case, you can see we lined up red in the house. And that's going to allow us to go in that other direction. And then in this case, you can just line the white part up with the red, and that will let you go. It's not really backwards, but it'll let you go in the opposite direction. Something to note, just as an FYI, this compass direction is not actually lined up with that bearing that I read you earlier, so that's not quite right. That's a different bearing on the map. I believe that is, yeah, this bearing. So that is as if you were doing north 48 east. Also, our compasses are not high tech enough to really go beyond just those first two digits. So those are really the only two you need to pay attention to. Another thing that can be helpful as you go through your visit is so you can mark up your map so you can show where you've gone. This will be really helpful when you come home and you need to write up a narrative, because you'll be able to say the order in which you visited the boundaries, which sections, if you did something like a big cross through to get home, where you went to get there. And then also for your photo log, what you can do is you can just write numbers that correspond to the pictures you took along the route, and you'll have that marked there. This is one option to navigate. You can also use a GPS app on your phone. If you are interested in doing that, you can actually get the boundary line downloaded to your phone. You just have to email Ann Payer to get that. But in general, this survey map is a really great tool to understand before you go, use while you're there, and then help you remember your visit once you're done.